Okay, so what I did for this demo is I just created and we're not seeing it yet, but I've created this little project, I guess we could call it. So I've done my npm init, which we saw this morning, and you can see in my package.json, I have a couple dependencies here, but I'm actually not going to use those. I changed my mind about how we're going to do this. So in the upcoming days, you guys will be introduced to Express, and you'll learn a more succinct way of writing your servers. But in the early days, you're going to learn how to do it with the HTTP module. So I kind of went back on that and decided, okay, let's do the demo based on the HTTP module, since that's probably what you're doing in the platform right now. So this is our package.json, and then I've got this other file in here, which is my app.js, and that's where we have our server code that we're going to be using for the demo. And I'll just kind of take you through it so that you know what's going on here. We're bringing in the HTTP module like we did this morning. We're also bringing in the file system module, again like we did this morning. And then what we're doing here is we are invoking the create server method. Let me make this bigger, sorry. Oh, shoot. Okay. Hopefully that's better. Nice and visible. Okay, good. So we're invoking this method called create server, and that method requires us to pass in a callback function. And our callback function, as you can see, it's anonymous because we don't have a name to it. In that callback function, we're going to take in the request and the response. And this will allow us to do some different things. So the request object is going to tell us things like, what was the method of the request? Also, we can determine what was the URL of the request. And then our response object is the thing that's going to allow us to actually send something back. Okay? So when we get inside here, I'm just setting a variable URL, and that's just simply the URL of the request. So if we hit a route that's just the index route, it's going to actually just give me a /, kind of as expected. Or if we hit a route /hello, it's going to give me that exact same thing. It's going to, this variable that I've declared here is value will become /hello, only within the context of this individual request. Okay, so don't get any ideas about, this request URL is always one thing. It's only within the context of if I'm in one request response cycle. Okay. You guys have any questions about that? Because we're, as we've been talking about with hoisting and variables and things like that, this is being declared and assigned inside this callback function. So nowhere outside of the create server, we would have no access to that variable at all. Yes.
It's like what we talked about yesterday about constant versus variables.
Yeah.
URL is a variable, but a special kind of variable called constant, in which you can no longer reassign that to anything. It's
correct.
Just that. Okay.
It's done.
Okay.
Yeah. So within this individual request response cycle, so if somebody has hit our URL, let's say they hit our index page, that / that's going to get assigned to URL can no longer, we can't reassign this at all. URL is now set. It's done.
It's like a safety measure for developers. I don't accidentally reassign this to that. Or something.
Correct. Yeah. We just simply couldn't reassign it unless we want to get an error. So there's that.
What if you had constant URL equals your request.url, then you somewhere down the line you had variable URL? What would happen? Equals something.
Wouldn't work, right?
I don't know. Let's try it. I can't say I've ever tried that. That's an interesting question. So let's just try, we'll say var URL equals something else. I suspect this will be a problem, but yeah.
Would you mind if ask a very dumb question?
No. There is no such thing.
No, but I'm trying to understand, like, where are we right now? Are we talking about API calls? Are we talking about objects? Or like,
Sure.
What
Okay,
yeah.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
Who's the daddy of this conversation?
So here's the deal. This isn't really going to be the main topic of this afternoon. I just wanted to pull it up and kind of show you guys, okay, this is what our server is doing so that when we start making the calls on the front end, it will make sense to you why they're sending back the information that they're sending back.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. All right. So as far as this, I suspect we'll get an error. And I've already saved the file, so let's just try something here. So I'll send. Looks like it errored out. And then down here, identifier URL has already been declared.
Okay.
Yeah, so it does create a problem. So after this, let me close out the terminal real quick. So the next thing that we're actually going to do is we're going to check to see what the method of the request was. And if the method is a get, and these will always be capitalized when we're using the HTTP module. If it's a get method and the URL is a /, all I really want to do is do this thing that we saw earlier, which is use the file system module and invoke the read file method. And I want to pass in the name of the file that I want, the encoding of the file, which is just UTF-8, and then I'm going to run another callback. So if this is troubling to you, this is kind of like we've got a callback and then another callback within that. Something I was telling Margot earlier today is that sometimes you're getting these situations where you have callbacks within callbacks within callbacks, and that's typically known as callback hell.
Something we want to avoid, or is there a real out-of-life application that does that?
Yeah, you don't really want to be in that situation, at least from a code readability standpoint. The computer doesn't really have a problem with it because I can nest callbacks, fairly deeply. It's just a matter of how high can the call stack go. Call stack can go pretty high, but your brain is going to have trouble parsing like what is going on as the indentation keeps moving to the right and we go deeper in the callbacks. You're just going to be like, I don't know what I'm looking at.
Is there really a real-life application that uses that? You need to have a callback within callback within callback. This system uses it, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Sometimes you need to nest callbacks, but one way that you can flatten those out is by actually creating named functions. So you see how these are all anonymous functions here? If I were to name those functions, then I could actually sort of flatten out my structure. I could have a function to handle responses, and that wouldn't even be nested inside anymore. I'd write it somewhere outside, and then I would just call it in here.
So the same thing, but we avoid the problem.
Yeah, but we avoid sort of nesting our callbacks deeper. Now in this case, it's really only two things, so it's not much of a problem. But if you do find yourself getting into that situation that I'm inside a callback, I'm inside another callback, you may want to flatten it out. So then that's what we're going to do if we hit the index route. We're simply just going to give back that HTML file. That's it. And the way that we do this is we write that file to the response object. That's how we start the whole thing. Later on, you'll see at the end of this, we actually do a response.end call. So right in here, this is the thing that completes the actual response. So we have to, when we're using the HTTP module, we have to call the .end method in order to finalize everything. Okay. So back up here, the other things that we're doing is I've just got a couple different methods here. So if the method is post, forget about this. This actually was not doing anything for us. We're just creating some different content objects. So you can see I've declared this variable up here with my let content. Right now, it hasn't been assigned to anything, so what's its value?
Undefined.
Undefined. Yeah, so if we get in here, if we get inside the post method, we're going to assign content to this object literal right here. So it's got a result property of success, it's got a message, you posted something. All right? Say it again.
So make sure it's let company global so you can use it down there.
Yeah, it's not technically global, it's just that here we still have access to that right there. But it's because it's within that context. So it's not global, it's not actually outside all of the functions. That would be.
You could get the same result if you just did var content.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I just wanted to introduce you guys to let and const because there have been a lot of questions about it, and I think that if you just get exposed to it a little bit, you'll see that it's not really a big deal. So then, if we do that, we get this. Else, if the request method is put, we're going to get this. You put something. Okay. Clever, right? And then finally, assuming that we've gotten through these methods, we're just going to assume it's a GET request. It's not necessarily. It could be like a delete request or something else. But we're just going to assume it's a GET request. So the message is you got something.
But the request method is always going to be GET unless you specified otherwise. GET is the default.
You mean from the front end? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, isn't it?
Oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. So if we're running, for instance, if we run the .ajax function, if we don't specify a method, by default, it's going to do it as a GET request. Yeah. And then finally, underneath this part, once I'm ready to actually write my response, all I do is I go response.write, and then I pass in the object. Have you guys seen JSON.stringify yet?
Make this content a string.
Yeah. So what it does is it serializes JSON for us. So it turns what we see as an object like this, for instance. What it'll do is it will collapse all of that stuff into essentially one line. It'll keep the commas. It'll surround these guys with double quotes and surround these with double quotes because valid JSON needs to have double quotes on both the properties and the values. And it'll turn that into one long string. So that way, when I pass this back to the client side, it's going to come back that way. It's going to come back as a string of JSON.
So then is there any difference between .serialize and stringify? It sounds like they both do the same thing, right?
.serialize on JSON?
Yeah.
Is that a method on JSON?
Going through the AJAX, yeah, they have a .serialize function.
Isn't the .serialize?
It says it grabs everything from a JSON object and returns a string.
Okay. Maybe it is the exact same thing. I haven't looked at .serialize in a while. But according to what you're saying, it sounds like it's doing the same thing. Yeah, but this is the regular way that you just do it with JavaScript, JSON.string.
Oh, that.
So the stringify method on JSON will collapse your object into one long string that has valid, like I was saying, these will have double quotes on them, these will have double quotes, you'll keep your commas. And then this will just be, it's all going to be in one string, so you will still have the curly braces in there as well. And then when we send that back to the client's going to know how to deal with that. Because if you see up here, I've set this response.write head. This is the response code that we're going to send back, so 200. And then this second object here means that we're actually writing a header. The header that we're writing here is just content type. And we're saying it's application/JSON. So that's what we want to tell the client, that I'm giving you back JSON. So be prepared for that. Any questions on any of this stuff? Hmm? No? Yes? Maybe? Okay, so we're good with that. I'm going to slip on over to the HTML file that I've created for the same thing. And I'm just going to show you we've got a few different things. I've got 3 buttons. One that's going to get, one that's going to post, one that's going to put. All right? So inside here, we've seen this kind of before when we have the document.ready. When the document is ready, we're going to run this anonymous callback function here. Right? And we are one level in thus far. So let me just put a return over here. So these are what the different methods are going to do. When we click the get button, we're going to run the $.get method. So this is the dollar just says that we're using jQuery's methods. And .get means we're just going to make a GET request to that specific URL. Yeah, we're just retrieving something. That's the request type. And you'll see all I've done, this method takes a callback, and I just passed it console.log. So that just means that whatever comes back, I'm going to log it. I'm not really doing anything with it. I'm not putting it on the page, anything like that, because this is really just about the AJAX requests themselves. As far as putting things on the page, I know you guys have had a lot of practice with that. But, you know, if you want me to do anything with it, we could do that as well, if it's, you know, if there's any trouble in that area. And then the post, we're going to just do something slightly different. We're going to do a post request to that exact same URL. So notice that we're sending a request to the exact same URL in all 3 cases. It's just the difference is the method that we're using. So in the first case, we're doing a get method right here. Second case, we're doing a post method. And then in the third case, because it's a put request, I've done a complete $.ajax request. I don't believe there's a $.put function.
If your dot click is,
What's that?
there's a function. The function should be function.
No. It's just there's something else.
Oh, damn! Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So so this method is a little bit more explicit. If we do a $.ajax, we actually want to pass in the URL, and then if we left this off, if we didn't say what method it was, by default it would be a GET request.
What's a put?
So we generally use put methods if we're trying to make changes to a resource. So if for instance, if I had an API and I was trying to change a specific product, something like that, I might make a put request to something like /API/products and then / the ID of the product that I want to change, and then I would pass along the data that I wanted. I wanted the product to have once I made the
It's like
change.
you pushing the data.
Yeah, you're updating the.
Update. Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting
Now I
it.
want to be known as John Wick, that sort of thing.
Right. Right.
It's a good name.
John. So that's all we have here, and then success is, this is the callback function that I want to run once this call is successfully made. Okay, and up here inside these two, in our $.get and our $.post, I didn't have to explicitly set that in the options. The second argument of these is the callback that I want to happen on success. Yes.
For the ID put section, there is no $.put method. It's just $.ajax.
Yeah, I don't believe there is a $.put. I was looking for that earlier today, and no, I don't think so. It threw an error when I tried to call it, put it that way. So yeah, it is apparently not a method.
Okay.
So there's that.
So use $.get.
Does this generally make sense to you guys? How we're doing it?
Console.log is the callback. Once you
It
reach
is the
the
callback.
route, all this will run, and then
Right.
run the console.log.
Yeah, so for instance, when I click the post button, the button that has the ID of post, I'm going to run this callback function, which calls the $.post method to this URL, and then it runs this callback when it successfully completes. Okay. So let's see that working in action, and then after, maybe what we could do is we could just change one of these callbacks or something and do something else, just so you guys can see. You know, we can do a lot of different things with the data. But anyway, so here I've got my server running, and just so you guys can see too, earlier we talked about NodeMon. Right now, I've got this thing checking for changes. And real quick, before I demo this, I wanted to show you guys this little scripts block here. So inside your package.json, you can create some different scripts that will do things for you. Trying to cover off that. Okay. So here, I've created a script called dev. And if I want to run this thing in sort of a development mode where it's constantly refreshing on changes, all I have to do is run this npm run dev, and it will automatically run the script that I've called dev in here. Okay? So when I call that, it's going to run this command for me. So I'm running nodemon, and then this -e means I want to look for changes in these two types of files. So if I make a change to an HTML file, it's going to reload my application on the spot, just like that. And then this is the file that I want to be running, app.js. So we'll make a quick change, and you guys can just see how that works, because we talked about it earlier. So if I wanted the name of this file, or let's just change the title. So we'll say AJAX. Yeah. See how it refreshed for me right away? So that's nice. So if I go here to this, right now the title is still AJAX because I haven't refreshed the page on the client side. So let's do that. Now we got AJAX, yeah. So it is actually, you know, refreshing on the fly for us, which is super nice. So let's make some of these calls. We'll click some of the buttons. I'll click the .get here, and you notice we logged out some different things. So let's talk about what those things are. I've got jQuery's documentation up here, and real quick I'll just look up the .get method. Oops, that wasn't $.get. I think we need to do jQuery.get. Okay. Can you guys see that okay? Sort of. the .get, jQuery.get. No? Okay. So the things that it's going to take is a URL. This is the first argument that it takes. And then these ones that are in square brackets, these are optional. So it would be pretty silly to just make a GET request and do nothing, but I guess the success function is optional, technically. But so, yes, question? No? Okay, just stretching. So success, though, you can see the signature of this callback here is that it's going to take some different arguments. So the first part of the success, the first argument the success function will take is the data itself. So that's kind of what we would expect to see. The second argument is a string which represents the status of the request. So usually if things went well, we should see a success in that second parameter. And then the third argument is the actual XML HTTP request itself. and that you guys would essentially never use. It's a very raw, low-level API that people used years ago for these types of requests. jQuery is giving you access to it, but you're not really going to need to do anything with it. So when we logged these things out, you'll see that we got all three of those things. It logged the data, it logged the status, and it also logged that XML HTTP request. So let's go back here. This first thing was the result itself, so that's what we were sending back from the server. The second thing, this success right here, is the status that comes from that callback as well. And then the third thing was the XML HTTP request, which, as you can see, has a bunch of different properties on it. And here's one of the properties that's kind of interesting, the response JSON. Yes?
That weird file you just mentioned. What's the important thing we should take out once we get this back in the console?
Well, what I was going to say is I'm just showing you guys what comes back. You don't necessarily need to do anything with the second and third argument, although you might check the status to make sure that it was successful. That's totally up to you. But really the thing that you're going to be working with the most is the first argument, which is the data that comes back.
Did I get it back?
Yeah, so if I'm in here, we'll go back to, let me just close this out. So down here in my code, if I wanted to do something other than console log, I can just do something with the data. So if I pass it in if I write a function that takes in one argument, it's going to give me the very first one that it listed there. So there were three things. There was the data itself, the second argument was the status, and the third argument was the actual XML HTTP request. So if I just want to console log the data and nothing else, I can just go like this. I wrote a function that takes in some data and then just console logs it. So let's try that real quick. And then again, it's refreshing on my server side, but I do still need to refresh on my client side because that's not happening automatically. Okay, so we hit the .get, and this time the only thing I'm console logging is just the data itself, nothing else. Because I'm only using the very first argument that they give me in my callback function. I'm not using the status or the XML HTTP request.
Could you call it data? Do you have to call it data? Or could you call
No,
it
you can call it anything. Let's do that too. So let's just call it, oops. Oh, sorry, let me get out of this. So let's just call it stuff. All right. No different. Yeah. So you can call those things whatever you like. It's just make sure that you're consistent, because in here, if I wrote a function and I called it stuff, and then I tried to console log data, what do you guys think is going to happen then? Yeah, because not only have we not assigned data to anything, we simply don't have a variable data at all. So let's test that out and make sure that we're right about it. Oops. There we go. So reference error, data is not defined. So you'll kind of get into a pattern. If you always call it data, it'll be pretty easy to remember because you're just consistently calling it one thing and you won't need to worry about that problem so much. Yeah. So we did a .get request. Let's try the other ones too. So if we do a .post request, again we're getting all three of these things back. So we're getting the data object, we're getting the status, which over here is success, and then we're getting the actual request itself. So since I've determined we probably don't need all that other stuff, let's just create a function out here which handles our request. So function handle request, or handle response makes more sense. And that's going to take in some data object, and then I'm just going to console log the data that comes back. And in here, I'll simply replace this with handle response. And then I'll do the same thing over here. We're not going to log them every time. We're only going to be logging the data itself that came back. Response. All right, so if I refresh here, clicking on post, here we go. Message was you posted something, just like we had it on the server. If I click here on put, same thing, we're getting back you put something as a message. So that's the whole cycle. We covered the server end of it, where we set different things to happen depending on what type of request method we were getting. And then on the front end, we had different buttons that were just handling those methods. So if I click on a get button, then I make my get request. If I click on a put button, I'll make a put request, and a post button, post request. Obviously, your projects won't be, like 3 buttons like that. But that's essentially how it's going to happen to make your AJAX requests in jQuery. That's really all you're doing. Is mostly you're going to provide a URL that you're going to, and then you'll provide a callback function to handle the data once it comes back from the server. Once it comes back from the server to the client side, which is your browser. Questions? Thumbs up? Thumbs, everyone? Good? Yeah, and if you have any other questions, though, feel free to ask me outside of lecture or discussion, demo, whatever you want to call it.
We have your number.
You got my number.
And recording?
Yeah, I'm going to end the recording here.
Oops.